Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, but especially ladies, for today's lesson 3-3, Women Win New Rights. Today is going to be all about the women's suffrage movements and the heroism of these two ladies, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Now, American society had been evolving for a while, and the progressive era led to wider educational options for both middle and upper class women. Poor women still had fewer options. That does become better throughout American society, but at this time you did need to be a middle or upper class woman to be able to attain an education. We also see more and more women who are leaving their homes to seek out employment. Up until this point, most women stayed home, never held a full-time job. Many never held a part-time job, and those who did held it for only a short period of time. But things are changing. New technology was making housework a lot less challenging. Instead of sitting at home and churning butter by hand, we now have factories that are churning butter. You can go to the grocery store and buy a stick of butter for a fairly inexpensive amount of money. It's not all that challenging. So all these homemade goods are now becoming available in stores. You don't have to hand sew and knit every article of clothing. You don't have to make your own home cleaning supplies. And so the role of a homemaker is no longer requiring a full day's labor. It's much easier to run a household. So women have more time on their hands. This free time allows more and more women to seek jobs. Women are looking for jobs and they're finding them in factories, usually textile factories at this time. They're the factories that are making clothing. They're also finding jobs in stores and in offices. Women are working as typists, telephone operators, clerks, type of secretarial role. And by this time, we have many, many more opportunities for women. Now, about 50% of women are still leaving the workforce after they get married, but 50% of married women are remaining in the workforce, and this is a huge increase from previous times. Now, as women become more and more connected to society outside of the household, they become more and more aware of the issues of society. And middle-class women in particular are focused on those women's issues, the issues that will make their lives better and make sure that the world is more fair to women themselves. Now, one of the leaders in this, and a woman we've talked about once before, is Jane Addams. Jane Addams was the founder of the Hull House in Chicago, who really focused on helping poor and immigrant women, helping those women find their foothold in American financial and labor society. They provide that financial education. How can you manage a household? How can you manage your money? And how can you find a good job? And the Hull House really does do this work in addition to advocating for other policy changes in government, trying to help society itself evolve and grow and recognize the important role of women in American society. Another woman leader was Carrie Nation. Carrie Nation was the leader of the Prohibition movement. She believed that alcohol was the cause of most of society's problems, and her actions really did bring national attention to this issue and helped bring about that 18th Amendment that we talked about last lesson. This is the one that made alcohol illegal in the United States. Tremendously successful effort led by a tremendously successful woman. But the biggest issue of the day was, of course, women's suffrage, the right to vote. Progressive women who are getting jobs and better education and more connected with society are saying, hey, how come we are denied this fundamental right of American citizenship? How come we're not allowed to vote? Well, the fight to vote was a long and a hard one for American women. The most definitive step in this direction was in 1890, when the National Women's Suffrage Association was started under Elizabeth Cady Stanton. This woman right here began this essential organization for pushing for women's suffrage, that is, the right to vote. Now, in 1892, Susan B. Anthony is going to take over the leadership of this organization, and it's going to be under her leadership that they shift their focus a little bit, and they focus on a states-first approach. They go to the states and try to get the right for women to vote in state legislatures, state elections. And they pushed this approach and they gained some momentum. But by 1914, it was still true that only 11 states had approved women's suffrage. In 11 states, women had the right to vote. The 19th Amendment will change that. Women's suffrage prior to the World War I really only existed in Western states. Western states were more progressive. Women had a more essential role in society. Women always have an essential role in society, but it was a more public role in society. And prior to World War I, Eastern and Southern states still did not value women the way they should. The 19th Amendment, however, comes about after World War I, and because of the effect and the advances that women had made during that time. And in 1919, the 19th Amendment was passed and allowed for complete women's suffrage. Now, it was women's efforts in World War I that convinced Americans to expand the right to vote. It was during this war that Americans saw women working in factories and doing fundraising and doing community organization. All the men were off fighting the war, and women stepped right up to take over their roles and did them every bit as well as men, and in some cases did it better than the men were. And this was recognized immediately by Americans who were already thinking progressively and saying, geez, these women, they're pretty good. Maybe we should finally recognize that. President Wilson was one of those people who did recognize that. Woodrow Wilson supported the amendment, and with a little bit of his vocal support, was heading in that direction anyway. The 19th Amendment was passed, and women gained the right to vote. All right, well, that was today's lesson on women gaining new rights and new roles in American society. I hope that you've learned something today and that you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you next time. Farewell.